Keir Starmer should have exercised something resembling political judgment. He's not even a particularly good technocrat. He can't do anything.
You expect these kinds of attitudes in the National Front or the BNP or something.
The double standard where anti-semitism exists on the left. The Green Party has an alarmingly high tolerance for these kinds of attitudes.
I think he's an extremely dangerous man. In fact, I think the lot of them just ooze hatred.
No, I just think with J.K. Rowling, the fury that's directed towards her is such disproportion to what it is that she's ever actually said.
Alastair Campbell's comedian daughter talking with a trans activist, and both of them are saying that the women outside the Supreme Court celebrating their win were ugly, they have horrible clothes.
They hate and they can't explain why they hate. Trans radical activists are unequivocally some of the worst people on the planet.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, delighted to be joined down the line this week by Spike's editor Tom Slater.
Hello.
And thrilled to have making his Spike podcast debut, the wonderful actor James Dreyfus. Welcome, James.
Hello.
Thanks so much for coming on. We have plenty to discuss today. We will be talking about Starmer's battle with the Blob, the Greens' anti-Semitism problem, and J.K. Rowling versus the Campbell family. So, Keir Starmer has been under pressure again this week over the Peter Mandelson scandal. Last week, he sacked Olly Robbins, the former head of the Foreign Office, the lead civil servant there. There's been a kind of battle of words. A lot of the focus, Tom, has been on who followed the right process or who didn't. That seems to have been the argument that's been had out in the Select Committee, where Olly Robbins appeared on Monday. There's been other civil servants appearing throughout the week. Tom, what have you made of this route? Because it does seem to ultimately miss the bigger picture about the Mandelson scandal. This is not a question of vetting or procedures of rules. It's that the man is dodgy and anyone should have spotted that.
No, exactly. And also that Keir Starmer should have exercised something resembling political judgment. But I agree with you. After the week that we've had, Keir Starmer trying to stick up for himself in the Commons, Olly Robbins in front of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Cat Little, people that many of us were blissfully unaware of until this scandal hit. If I never hear the word process again in my life, I'll be a very, very happy man. I mean, it's managed to take what is an incredibly kind of high drama, juicy political scandal centering around New Labour slimeball Peter Mandelson, his alleged interests in Russia and China and in palling around with the world's most famous sex offender, and make it something really boring and make it something really kind of procedural, which I think has suited Starmer up to a point, allowing him to kind of twist in the wind and argue about technicalities. But the main tramlines of this story are still very much there, one of which is the spectacular failure of judgment in relation to the Mandelson appointment, full stop. Keir Starmer is expecting us to believe that this alleged failure of security vetting after Mandelson was already appointed was a complete moral horror show, even though, the dogs in the street could have told you that Mandelson returning to high office would have ended in scandal. And indeed, we're hearing daily of the information that's provided either to the government or to the Labour Party before the appointment, which would have surely dissuaded anyone from making that appointment. But it's also turned into a discussion about honesty. Keir Starmer, of course, ran on being the anti-Boris Johnson, saying that he was going to bring truthfulness and process and principle back to government, and yet he's proven himself to be an incredibly slippery character, openly kind of contradicting what Olly Robbins has said in a way that hasn't really convinced anyone, hiding behind procedure in a way that, even if it might be technically true, doesn't really speak to the spirit of what he's being accused of. And for him, it's particularly amusing that he's now being hit with the very same allegations and also some of the very same kind of procedural measures to try and bring him down that he used and attempted to weaponize against Boris Johnson. So the story is still enormous. I mean, we're witnessing a government not so much falling as disintegrating, but it's one in very Keir Starmer fashion has been played out in a battle of the rule books, which has often left many of us quite bemused, I think.
I genuinely thought I was hallucinating when Olly Robbins, speaking to the Select Committee, said that there are two books or two pieces of it, like documents that he can hold in his head. One is the Civil Service Code, and the other is a Book of Common Prayer, and he likened the two as if they're on the same plane of holiness. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. James, Starmer has, as Tom suggests, Starmer has presented himself as Mr. Rules, Mr. Process, Mr. Technicalities. He's bigged up his past as a human rights lawyer. I mean, he's not someone who has any charisma, doesn't have any policies. I mean, does he have anything left if he doesn't have the man who, diligently followed the rules. If you can't cling on to that, what is there about Starmer that is worth supporting?
I don't know. The poem I always think of when I see Starmer is, "Yesterday upon the stair I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. Oh, how I wish he'd go away." That's how I feel about Starmer. He's a lawyer and he acts like a lawyer, sort of mixed in with a politician. And I don't believe a word he says. And the more he says that he hasn't lied, and if you could just go back and look at clips from what he would usually say to the opposition when he was in opposition, it does seem to me that the words pot, kettle and black seem to pop up. But I can't even sort of viscerally sit in the same room as the television and hear him speak, because I get so frustrated in the fact that he thinks he's, by taking this position, he's a strong man that's doing the best for the entire country. And I think his main problem is he has an absolute failure to be able to read a room, and it hasn't taken that long for us all to find that out.
Yeah, I mean the speed with which his popularity has collapsed is always pretty astonishing. He's got the lowest approval ratings of any prime minister in history, lower than Liz Truss, who couldn't outlast the lettuce. Tom, what do you think is keeping him in office at the moment? I suppose that it seems as if there's two things. One is the local elections on the horizon, the results looking so bad that no one wants to carry the can for that. But also perhaps his rivals are really not that up to snuff, and there's no clear successor to Starmer that everyone can agree on who should take the mantle in his place.
No, exactly. I think it's those two things. It's the lack of available and credible options, and the kind of the uneasiness of anyone in the Labour Party, with a few exceptions, to properly pull the trigger. We've had the first MP come out and call for him to go, and we've had a lot of anonymous briefings from certain cabinet ministers that it's a question of when, not if. But they're clearly quite uneasy and willing to, at the very least, given the local elections, have to wear that, and then potentially someone move on after that. The other thing, which is sometimes talked about, maybe not enough, is that sort of the way in which the bond markets progressively seem to dictate a lot of political decision making at the moment. They're very jittery at the prospect of anyone replacing Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, certainly anyone who would be considered to their left. And given that we saw Andy Burnham and Angela Rayner having that confab up north earlier this week, that's precisely the sort of people who might scare the horses, and the Labour Party know that. So I think those things are holding him in place, but you'll notice those incredibly negative things. There's not anything that speaks to, well, he did win us this election, because everyone knows that majority was pretty much built on sand, very cynical election campaign. It's not because of the fact that he commands tremendous support in the country, because we know for a fact that many people feel much more like James does and Starmer himself about his record. And this is the problem with governments that stand for nothing and also increasingly incapable of doing anything, that are kind of as visionless as they are useless, is that scandals, even of this magnitude, do arise from time to time. There's a lot of grubby people in politics. Sometimes that's necessary to get things done, although I think there is a limit, and that limit is probably appointing Peter Mandelson. But these things could be weathered if you had something else to point to, if you had some measure of charisma, if you had some measure of vision, if you had a string of achievements to point to, other than those breakfast clubs that we never hear the end of. Starmer's got none of that. And he's now increasingly looking like someone who doesn't know how to get through the next news cycle rather than change the narrative and do something different. But I think it was ever thus with Keir Starmer. I mean, they tried to make a virtue out of the fact that he was this bland technocrat. But what we're finding out is he's not even a particularly good technocrat. He can't do anything. It's not that he doesn't know he doesn't know what he wants to do, nor can he do it. And that's been true ever since. But now it's just kind of becoming much clearer. And it is fascinating, just coming back off James, who said this, the extent to which both myself, but also most of the public, really despise this man. Like you would expect people to find him maybe boring, dull, uninspiring. But I think because he was so holier than thou and has now proven himself to be a hypocrite, that really sticks in the craw. But also, on a quite basic level, the sense that he is a sort of daily affront to the seriousness of the office that he holds is almost like a kind of walking insult to the role of Prime Minister and what it's supposed to stand for, that people have just had absolutely enough, and they've turned against him with a speed which even I didn't perceive happening when he was, waved in the summer of 2024.
But the point that you made about Mandelson, I find it extraordinary, because I seem to remember when I was, a much younger man, that Mandelson was there making mistake after mistake and being dishonest, and was a sort of well-known part of the gay mafia. But I'm just astonished that this guy has managed to last so long. I mean, and keep reappearing. In his latest incarnation as the potential American ambassador. I'd love to know how that happens with someone with such a dodgy past.
And someone so dodgy that he's nicknamed Prince of Darkness.
Yes.
What could have gone wrong by bringing him back?
Yeah. So it's not. I mean, we can't officially know. We're not allowed to know what exactly meant that Mandelson didn't pass the Foreign Office vetting. Did such a vetting even need to take place?
That's kind of my point. Is who said, oh, I know, let's put up Rose West as Mother of the Year. I don't quite get the thinking behind it.
Don't give Starmer any ideas.
Yeah, right.
So should we talk about Zach Polanski and the Green Party? This week, the Green Party leader made a pretty astonishing statement. He said that we need to have a conversation as to whether Jewish people, when they feel unsafe, is that merely a matter of perception or is it a reality? He said this in a week after 3 attempted arson attacks on Jewish institutions in London alone. He himself, when asking whether this was a real problem, even referenced the attack on the Hadzola ambulances in North London. So he clearly knows that there are some violent anti-Semitic attacks going on. But Tom, is this just a perception? Is it being ginned up to... is it being weaponized against the left and the likes of Polanski, who just care deeply about Gaza?
No, of course it isn't. And the reason that he's choosing to speak in this way is because there's a lot of people in the Green Party now who think precisely that, who think that the anti-Semitism horror show is got up, that it's something which is being used by sinister Zionists to gain sympathy or to make themselves look like the victims. And that's not just speculation. We know this from the reporting in recent weeks, which has shown an awful lot of candidates in the upcoming local elections for the Greens who have been saying things even more extreme than that. They've had to, again, answer for the fact that there's been a string of candidates, some of them which in the northeast, who, alongside kind of sharing images of a swastika underneath an Israeli flag, have talked about the ambulances attack potentially being a false flag is one of the quotes that is buzzing around there. People saying horrendous things after October the 7th, talking basically about it in the language of resistance and telling people not to believe the media as to what took place. And then a very remarkably relaxed response, I think it's fair to say, from the Green Party, which is to restate their opposition to anti-Semitism, but also making clear that people should be able to criticise the state of Israel, pointing out that some of those posts have been deleted, as if that's an answer to what has taken place. Many of these, from what I can tell, and it's a little bit hard to ascertain this, many of these candidates that I've spoken about haven't even been suspended yet or disassociated. Even under Corbyn's Labour, there was pretty swift action a lot of the time. It might have happened from another wing of the Labour Party. It might have been something that made some of the people around Jeremy Corbyn a little bit nervous, but it did take place. This is something entirely different. What has become clear is that the Green Party is the sort of successor to Corbyn's Labour in terms of kind of flinging open the door to these kinds of people. And what you're getting from the leadership is not, well, there's a few bad apples necessarily. It is to kind of concede to a degree to what it is that they're saying. And in a time when Kemi Badenoch alluded to this point this week, it would be to talk about the perception of anti-Semitism versus the reality. I mean, he hedges that by saying, of course, both are a problem and both should be dealt with, etc., etc. But nevertheless, we got what he was saying there. If we were talking about a series of black churches which had just been firebombed, to say, well, at this point, it's probably, you probably should put it in perspective, shouldn't you? You would rightly be hauled over the coals for saying that. So again, it points to the double standard where anti-Semitism exists on the left and the extent to which the Green Party, to put it in as legally tight a way as I possibly can, has an alarmingly high tolerance for these kinds of attitudes within their ranks, even if they claim to disavow them personally. And this is something that they can't deny at this point. And these damning comments this week, I think, illustrate that game is being played on some of them.
Yeah, I mean, to give some examples, there was one candidate who claimed that Zionists killed 220 million Christians, and that Epstein Island is a symbol of the headquarters of the Zionists who are trying to control the world. Another said that it takes a serious effort not to be anti-Semitic. Another said that England has a government overrepresented with Zionist Jews. And on and on and on. One called the Hadzola ambulances attack not a revenge rather than a terror attack. I mean, James, you expect these kinds of attitudes in the National Front or the BNP or something, yet it's cropping up in a supposedly progressive party, a party that says that it stands for hope. I mean, what the hell is going on?
Well, you see, this guy, remember, is, for a start, always remember, he was an actor. Number one. I mean, forget about the hypnotizing breasts. He's an actor first and foremost. He's a useful. He's being used. It's extremely conveniently. He's being used by this Red-Green Alliance, who will end up eating him last, or second to last. But I think he's an extremely dangerous man. I think he's an extremely naive man. In fact, I think the lot of them just ooze hatred, a really nasty party. And I always think that we always talk about extremes. That the far left, which in my eyes, they certainly are the far left, are no better than the far right. To me, they're no different at all. It sort of completes a circle. And it's a great example is these people who call themselves Antifa, anti-fascist. Well, I've never seen anything more fascist in my life whenever you see these people get together. So I think the Green Party is where all cranks have gone. It's got nothing to do with, environment anymore, absolutely nothing to do with it. And I think it's, a lot of people make comparisons with the useful leftists who urged in the Iranian Revolution. And then, of course, what happened to all of them? They were the first to be gone. So I think his statements about on that particular issue, saying, well, it's perceived, or if he made that comment about anyone else, it would have been up. But they're all very sort of, yes, no, he can say it because, and that's a very dangerous position to be in. Number one, it was so today. You just saw this horrific video of this visibly Jewish man. I assume he was wearing the kippah or something, and this man literally comes to attack him on a bicycle, verbally abusing him, and you sort of have to think, how many times do you have to see this a day? We all watch it. Nobody opens a newspaper and sees this. We all look at it online and we see it happening. So I think he is possibly, him and his party, are possibly, we can laugh at them, ha 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 ha, and they're so stupid, and but it's also, I think they're the scariest around.
And Tom, the Greens have conducted a policy review, or they've started a policy review as an almost acknowledgement that many of their policies are absolutely crackers. It's almost as if the anti-Semitism is only one aspect of the extremism of this party. You look at what they're saying on migration. It's not just open borders, but that everyone should be allowed to claim a universal basic income as soon as they arrive. There should never be any deportations under any circumstances. And James, you mentioned the environment. They still have environmental policies that would essentially lead to the abolition of electricity. Certainly you wouldn't be able to, you shouldn't expect to be able to get, be able to plug things in and have them work under a green policy. What do you make of that aspect of things? I mean, there's some scrutiny coming onto their policies, but not nearly enough, it feels.
No, and far too late, I think. I mean, Zach Polanski himself is an incredibly insubstantial figure politically. He does, to James's point, kind of give off the vibe of essentially an overgrown theatre kid who is primarily interested in the attention rather than anything else. And that's kind of writ large in a lot of the policy making. I mean, I'm always sort of loath to just accuse people that you might disagree with of just being a bit dim. But if you're going around saying things like we aspire to a world with no borders, if you're going around saying that you are ideologically opposed to the very notion of economic growth, the great engine of living standards and progress throughout history, don't need it for some reason, and let alone all of the pretty out there policies they have on various different social issues, it's hard to conclude anything other than these people have just become like prisoners of virtue signaling. It sounds good, it sounds radical, it sounds important, and therefore it doesn't matter if any of it adds up. And it is funny because aside from anything else, the sort of contemporary left does define itself more than any other issue on the issue of racism, in opposition to racism. It's the sort of thing that even kind of different factions of it can all agree that's the sort of moral centre of this supposed movement. And yet, we can point it out to we're blue in the face, but maybe we have to. In the context of what's going on right now, and in the context of what's been going on with the British Jewish community from well before October the 7th, even before 2023, Jews in this country were the victims of about a quarter of all religiously motivated hate crimes. They're 0.5% of the population. It's only Jewish school students who, in every school up and down the country, have to go through airport-style security in order just to go about their business because of the ambient threat which exists to them, school children. No other community has to experience that. The fact that the left has even nothing to say about it, just sort of stares at its shoelaces, or in the case of many of these people now washing up in the Green Party, are dismissing it, downplaying it, dare I say even excusing it in some instances, shows that just they have nothing left. And particularly also the anti-fascism aspect. People who've been going around calling everyone to the right of Yvette Cooper a fascist for the longest time, and yet they see a video of 3 men dressed all in black firebombing Jewish ambulances, and they've got nothing to say about it. Oh, maybe it was Jews, maybe it was an inside job. I think it tells you everything you need to know about where this movement has gone. It's kind of lobotomized itself on so many different of the other policy areas that we've touched upon. But even its kind of core moral claim just lays in tatters now. They don't realise it, obviously, but I'm hoping with more scrutiny with these elections coming up, they are going to be exposed. And that's going to lead to a lot of people who might be tempted to vote Green, either because they want a kind of progressive alternative to the Labour Party or because they just want to roll the dice on something different, or they're a young person frustrated they can't get on the housing ladder or whatever, that this is not the movement that you maybe think it is. Because I think we're only really at the beginning of the public really getting the full picture about what this party is now.
And can I just add on to the end of that about him? I posted recently a picture of Polanski and the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, because I'd seen him the night before on stage talking about the legalization of drugs and things, which to me is a sort of free sweeties, all for free. And young people, of course, think, great, man, I can smoke weed whenever I want and want to do this, that, and the other. I mean, have either of you ever been to Vancouver? One of the most frightening cities you'll ever go to. There's a main street which is like your shopping drag, and the police keep all the drug addicts in one area and they keep moving them around. And if you take a wrong turn, you literally are on sort of zombie streets. It's one of the most frightening cities because the smell of weed is in the air, everywhere you go. But there's an air of menace to it that we still haven't got to yet in London. I mean, for all its faults, there's not that air of menace. But you'd have thought somewhere like Vancouver, well, actually, it doesn't come as a surprise anymore, but once upon a time, you would have thought Vancouver was quite sort of... And so I think he's especially dangerous because he does appeal to the youth who think it's all cool and wow, freedom, and, it reminds me of the sort of hippie movement back then, but on Spahn Ranch, when it all suddenly goes wrong and Manson sends out the girls, and it goes from joy and love to horror and hell in an instant, which is where I think they're inevitably going to end up.
In the bizarre Zach Polanski hellscape, they will have legal horse, but horse racing will be illegal. And they want to ban cigarettes as well, because that's big tobacco. Whereas drugs are made by, I guess, I don't know, anarchist collectives, people of color in Colombia. So let's talk about J.K. Rowling and her mullering of Alastair Campbell and Grace Campbell. As with any online spat, it's a little bit hard to detect where things started, but certainly there are two videos that I think are at the centre of this. One of them is one that you tweeted, James. You tweeted a clip of Alastair Campbell and Rory Stewart pontificating, talking absolute rubbish about the Supreme Court judgment. She retweeted that, and then not long after, Grace Campbell, Alastair Campbell's comedian daughter, was a clip resurfaced of her talking with a trans activist, and both of them are saying that the women outside the Supreme Court celebrating their win, the recognition of biological sex in law, were ugly. They have horrible clothes, and imagine how disgusting their pubic hair is. James, I mean, first of all, this is, I mean, as disgusting as it is, this is kind of what we come to expect from the people on that side of the argument.
They haven't changed, as I've said many times. And I'm not saying all trans people, obviously, but the trans radical activists are unequivocally some of the worst people on the planet. This is what they exist to do. They haven't. Yes, it still goes back to the fact that they haven't read the essay. They're still engaged in the game of Chinese whispers, and this hate has formed in their heart. And you don't have to know anything about her. They hate, and they can't explain why they hate. If she tweets something in support, they're against it. If they tweet everything, it's just to be opposed. And what people don't realize when they say that J.K. Rowling's tone is perhaps a bit severe and cruel, well, I'll tell you something. After reading, spending a lot of the part since the last 12 years that I've been on social media, and since she made the comment about dress as you please, reading some of the comments that have been directed her are some of the worst things I've ever read, and they continue to be so. So when somebody gets personal with you, like let's mention an India Willoughby, for example, who has got very personal with her, and if JK snaps back, everyone suddenly goes, that was so unfair, that tone was awful, and you have to say, no, you've got to go back and you've got to look at the reason why. You don't go up and poke a bear with a stick until it wakes up and then complain when it bites you back. She's got a perfect right to stand up for herself. She is made it very clear, very, very clear, that she supports people's right to live as they choose, do what they choose, and think. But there's a line in the sand. Women's rights were fought for long and, well, not quite there, but they got, their entitlements. But when did it suddenly be okay for men to say, no, sorry, actually, we'll forget about all that. I feel this, therefore I'm entitled to that. That's all she's ever said. And because she was one of the biggest people to say that, she paid I guess what it must have been a personal price, because they went after her children, things like that, and look what they did to Graham Linehan, etc., etc. So it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. And of course, the more they lose, the more they're going to escalate.
Absolutely. And one thing I think that J.K. Rowling has really hit the nail on the head on, certainly in some of her recent tweets, is saying that this movement is not only misogynistic, but also classist. It's working class women in particular who are most affected by this idea that men should be able to barge their way into any changing room, any rape crisis centre, etc., etc. And what do you make of that angle, James? I mean, it is it's all well and good for the sort of Hollywood elite or the Islington elite or whatever.
You've just got to imagine, your one of your relatives or someone that who's been told by her doctor, something 3 times a week, go and have a swim, and she's in her sort of early 80s and she's going along, or you think about your nieces or your your daughter and something going to swimming. I mean, are you telling me that the average person who goes to do that, they're the most affected? It's not really about going into luxury health centers and this, that. It is it is the ordinary working class people of this country that will suffer most of this, because a lot of them aren't online like a lot of us are online. A lot of them still buy a newspaper like we all do, but there are many sort of elderly people, my age and up, who do not use the internet. And if you actually, I've explained this, what I've been involved in for the past 12 years, to some people of my age, and they go, "Really?" I swear to God. And you think, well, of course you wouldn't know. This whole thing is being fought online and in the courts. And the papers won't tell the truth. The papers still write, oh, she murdered him with an axe. And you think, that's not a she, that's a he. So they contributed to this muddying of the waters. So I think she's absolutely right. I mean, and it is. And if they manage to turn it, people suddenly go around and go, hang on a minute, why is he that man showering next to my daughter? And they go, sorry, it's the law now. And it'll have been too late, because I think it's trying to be like they did in Ireland, try to sneak it in under the back door. I think it's terrible.
No, I just think with J.K. Rowling, the fury that's directed towards her is such disproportion to what it is that she's ever actually said. The tragedy is that has still become the kind of received wisdom, that she has become some kind of hate monger. You see various celebrities, periodically gesture to the fact, isn't it such a terrible shame that this is what has happened to the legacy of the woman who wrote Harry Potter? And it's the sort of thing, and I think you make a really good point, James, which is to say part of the fury is that she is kind of uncancelable, that because she is so wealthy and established, that they can't really exact that price from her in the way that they can with other gender critical women. That kind of infuriates them even more to a certain extent. But at the same time, there's been a tremendous cost to reputation, totally unearned, a personal cost. Constantly being bombarded with death and rape threats is not fun. Activists showing up outside of her house, taking pictures of the house. All of this stuff is very, very serious. And just the extent to which your name has been dragged through the mud for saying something so eminently reasonable, and because of the fact that most people are not necessarily going to go and read that very carefully, very compassionately argued essay. They're just going to take what they hear from people like the Rest is Politics, who claim to pronounce objectively and clearly on matters of policy and politics, that there is something wrong there. So it's a tremendous shame, even though she has written it out and shown tremendous courage, and I think that really reflects well on her. And you can only hope that there will be some kind of more full rehabilitation of her amongst the cultural set at some point. It's still such a tragedy that she's had to go through this, I guess.
I agree. I went to see Ricky Gervais the other night, testing, his new material, and he came. He said something very interesting. He said, they tried to cancel me before. They tried to cancel me, but now they don't. They sort of leave me alone, and I was thinking to myself, yeah, he's right. They do leave him alone. Every so often, someone will say, Ricky or whatever. And he said he'll focus on that very much. But it's very interesting that Ricky has said much more outrageous things about it. Okay, under the guise of being, comedy. But it's interesting that he's a man and she's a woman that's worked her way up from nothing, from having nothing, from a terrible abusive relationship. Because it is, I think it's essentially boils down to, let's hate the successful woman who won't roll over. And it's the oldest misogyny in the world. And of course, you get anonymous people behind a typewriter. You're going to see it. And that's why these people are the worst, because there are no depths that they won't sink to. I mean, some of the things that I've read, I've never read things like that before. And I've got a whole stack here of horror novels from the 70s. I've never read violence like it against her, but it's an irrational, and that's what she's had to deal with, and that must take a toll. And the fact that she's rich, so what? She earned it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you, James. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for watching at home. But that is not all. If you're a Spike supporter, you can join us now over on the Spike podcast Unlocked, where we'll be talking to James about being a TERF in the arts and so much more. See you there.
And we've created more labels, added more stupid letters, meaningless letters, and the most dangerous thing of all, just put a plus on the end. So it's indefinable.
Thank you so much for watching the Spike podcast. We'll be back next week, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the Spike podcast, then why not check out what else our channel has to offer, from our documentaries to our weekly interviews and podcasts like The Brendan O'Neill Show. And if you're a Spike supporter, you can watch the second half of this episode by logging in on the Spike website. If you're not yet a Spike supporter, then why not sign up now? You'll get unlimited access to the website, ad-free reading, discounted tickets to our events, and so much more. So become a Spike supporter today by going to spiked-online.com/support. That's spiked-online.com/support.